Well, Tom, we're approaching the end of the year. In fact, tomorrow is New Year's Day. Tonight is New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. And we have been going through the precepts of the Vino Veritas Society, the 6 main ideas that make up the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
And this is our 3rd or 4th in this series of podcasts. And we started kind of going through all of them from the beginning. I think
we kind of had a little ambition to try to get through all of them in one podcast. And we quickly learned that there's just too much there. There's too much good stuff to talk about.
Ambition's never a bad thing.
Yeah, that's right.
I hope at least everybody's enjoying the conversation. So we've kind of gone through and we've talked about how these build upon one another. It's not, they don't exist independently of each other. You can't say that all men are created equal if we don't all agree first that there's an objective moral truth in the world, and they all build. So we started with objective moral truth, and we get into all men are created equal. The equal individual natural rights of all people is how we are all equal. We're all equally human. And then last week we talked about the proper purpose of government.
And we did not do that by interviewing a bunch of members of Congress or state legislature because they seem to know the least about the proper purpose of government.
But I would love to have that conversation with them. I would really love to just sit down and sit with each one of them and say, what do you think the proper purpose of government? Why? How did you come to that conclusion? How did you come up with that? In fact, it's something you've encouraged the president to do for years when it comes to bureaucrats.
Absolutely. And, for our listeners and our members out there, we're sort of joking and being lighthearted here, but I would like to see some people run with this. Imagine, every political cycle, there are all these debates and speeches and interviews. If we could get some within the class of journalists and media personalities to start including that question. It'd be great for anybody. I don't care if someone's running for, the mayor of Denver or a governor or a state legislator or Congress or president of the United States. What a great beginning question. Tell us what you think the purpose of government is and let these politicians answer that.
I could only imagine the question. It's Bob Schaefer's story, right? He walks in, former Congressman Bob Schaefer. For those who are outside of Colorado, he was a Colorado congressman 10 years ago, 15 years ago, walked into a committee and realized that no one else on the committee had ever read the Constitution before.
Right.
And he tells that story a lot. So anyway, we got into the proper purpose of government last week. And wouldn't you know, just in time for Rand.
Let's add, because this is important. This is going to lead right into our discussion today.
Right.
It's to protect our individual rights, which means our natural liberty, your freedom to make your own choices and live the way you want to live, and to use your property, protect your property. That's what government is supposed to do. Not violate it, not control it, not confiscate it. Protect your property, protect your liberty. That's the proper purpose.
How about other things that, I mean, yes, they're all forms of theft when you consider they're taking your tax dollars to spend these, but is it the proper purpose of government to find out the effects, spend $1.5 million to figure out the effects on lizards by running them on a treadmill? Is it
Right.
Proper purpose of government to spray rats with urine and find out how they react? Or ground up bugs and figure out if humans will eat it if you ground it up first.
Yep.
These are all things that came out last week in Rand Paul's annual Festivus report. And you and I are both Seinfeld guys.
Right.
We know the reference. For those who don't, Festivus is Jerry Stiller, who plays George Costanza's father, Jason Alexander's father, creates this holiday Festivus. It's Festivus for the rest of us.
For the rest of us.
And the main feature of Festivus is you sit around the table and you have an airing of grievances.
You tell everyone around you what you don't like about them.
So
I think they have an aluminum pole too, right?
It's a feat of strength competition. Who can grab the pole away from somebody?
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, the airing of grievances.
Yeah.
Rand Paul, since he has become a senator, since he has joined the United States Congress, has annually put out his airing of grievances against his fellow members of Congress.
Right.
The ways that they have wasted taxpayer dollars by doing things that are not the proper purpose of government.
And I'm sure that's a highlighted subject at CNN and MSNBC, right? They probably spend 24 hours a day talking about Rand Paul's Festivus report.
I don't even think Fox News spends more than a minute or two on it, if that. But luckily, I mean, we talk a lot about the problems of social media and the censoring on social media. This made its rounds, and this year in particularly, it really made its rounds on social media. I saw more people sharing it. I saw more people posting about it than I ever have before. And I've been reading this thing for years.
By the way, this is just a little secondary incident. This is not a big point, but I just want to add it. He actually takes some time preparing this thing. Like it's not just a Word document with a bunch of numbers. It's enjoyable to look at.
It's well designed. There's pictures. There's little captions. He makes jokes throughout. You really see his personality come through in this. He really, every time I read it, I think, sometimes he feels like this very dry doctor type.
Right.
And he doesn't seem like the most fun person to go sit at a bar with.
Right.
And then you read that and you're like, yeah, I would go hang out with that guy. That guy would be a lot of fun to hang out with.
Yeah.
And in this year's Festivus report, Rand Paul identified $54.7 billion, that's billion with a B, $1 billion in government spending that he identified as wasteful. Now that doesn't even talk about proper purpose, right? And if you ask him proper purpose,
or whether it's constitutional,
sure,
it's just wasting money.
Sure. And if he went proper purpose of government, we'd be talking hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
But just in crazy experiments that the government did to try to figure things out, and if we go back, God, I wish I had remembered which podcast it was that we talked about Milton Friedman's quadrants of using other people's money.
Right. Well, it's a quadrant about the quality of choices when allocating resources, when spending money.
Sure.
And what Friedman showed famously is people tend to they make the highest quality choices. They think and study and research the most when they spend their own money on themselves. They're buying something for themselves with their own money because they want to get the best quality, whatever it is they're buying. They want the highest quality for the lowest price.
Right.
So they're selective, they're choosy, they're discriminating. When they spend their own money on someone else, well, they're not going to be the recipient. They're not the one using whatever the thing is. So they care a little less about the quality. They care more about the price because they are paying for it. If they're buying something that they're going to use for themselves, but they're spending someone else's money, think of a kid whose parents say, son, we'll pay for any college you want to go to. Well, what does the kid do? The kid picks the highest quality college he can get into, doesn't care at all about the price because he's not paying for it, someone else is. And then the fourth quadrant is the lowest quality of choices. It's when the people making the decisions on how to allocate capital or resources are spending other people's money on yet other people. And then you think of government. That's everything government does.
Right.
That's all that they do. They spend other people's money on programs and agencies that are going to provide things for yet other people.
And they don't care about what the outcome is of that money. So if something gets lost, imagine you buy something on Amazon and you get something that's not what you ordered.
Right.
The first thing you're doing is you're on the phone with customer service or you're in the chat box with customer service.
Right.
I want my money back.
Right.
This isn't what I ordered.
Right.
Right? There was a section of the report, and I wish I remembered. It was either $10 million or $100 million that we spent with a foreign company to buy test tubes for COVID testing. And when they got the order,
I saw this.
they were used plastic soda bottles.
Right.
And what did they do? Well, throw it out, not worth it. And there's millions and millions of dollars gone.
Yeah.
We lost $100 million worth of drones over Afghanistan.
Literally just lost them.
Just lost them.
Yeah.
Can't go find them. They are just gone. There's no explanation. There's no justification because it's not their money.
Right.
And they can just go buy more because they can tax us more. So it was an interesting timing, and I really would encourage anybody who wants to know more about this. It's a great read. It looks long.
Rand Paul's Festivus report. And we should make clear here the activities and programs that are funded are ridiculous and silly. And that's something to laugh about. because it's so over the top. What's not so laughable, what's not so funny is all that money they're spending, that's our money.
Right.
They're either actually taking that money from us in the form of taxation, or they're spending us into more and more debt.
They're printing money to be able to go buy those things.
And which devalues the money that we have in our wallet. Or they're creating debt that, either we have to pay off, or our kids or our grandkids. Somebody at some point is responsible for that debt. And that's not funny at all.
You and I actually have had this conversation a few times over the last couple of weeks about the national debt and whether or not, how much people actually care about the national debt and what they're leaving to their kids. And I think there's this perception out there of, well, the national debt's been around for decades and I didn't have to pay it and we can just keep kicking the can down the road. I want to put that a little bit into perspective. I looked it up. The numbers, we were at about a $7 trillion debt when Obama took office.
Okay.
We are now at about a $30 trillion debt.
Right.
National debt.
I was just looking at these numbers recently. If you add the debt of state governments, we're right at $30 trillion.
It was one thing, we were kicking the can down the road, and $7 trillion in and of itself is an obscene, almost imaginary amount of money. Like
Right.
I can't even picture what $7 trillion actually is.
Right.
But we all know what credit card debt is like. We all know what student loan debt is like. We know what debt feels like. And when you have a credit card bill that you can't pay this month and it's $700, okay, that's tough, but you make it up the next month and it's not the end of the world.
Right.
When it becomes $3,000, now you're talking, it's another feeling to it, right?
Yeah.
It's a heavier weight. You start to feel that pressure, and your creditors start to put more pressure on you. They might come after you. They're less likely to come after you for $700 than they are for $3,000. And when you put that into the perspective of the federal government, we've hit a point where we're actually borrowing money from China to pay China.
Yeah.
This whole thing has just gotten so far out of control.
Well, in fact, I would encourage people, my friend, to check out the work of my friend Anthony Davies. He's an economist who teaches at Duquesne University, and he has been focused on this subject for many years. He's got a bunch of there are videos out there on YouTube, and just Google the name Anthony, not Anthony, Anthony without an H, Davies. And one of the things he likes to point out, so we're talking these numbers here in this range from $7 trillion with Obama to $30 trillion today, and all that sounds terrifying and obscenely huge. And all those numbers do not include unfunded government liabilities.
Right.
What our governments have promised to people when they retire and their pension programs, you add that in, and all of a sudden those numbers soar into the hundreds of trillions of dollars that we are going to owe to people in the coming years and the coming decades. There's a serious fundamental problem here. And here's the other thing. It's not the problem. It has to be a spending problem. It is not that there's a line out there that progressives love to throw around how the rich just don't pay their fair share. And there are many people who have put together all kinds of interesting charts and graphs and compressed and distilled this information down. I mean, it turns out in terms of income tax, for example, and that is the number one source of revenue for the federal government. Payroll taxes is number two, but number one, the single biggest source of revenue for the federal government is individual income tax. And when you look at all the revenue that comes into the Treasury from individual income tax, a very small percentage of working Americans, productive Americans, pay the whole lion's share of all that revenue. Here's another interesting fact when we talk about the rich. There are about 600 billionaires in the United States today. It fluctuates because markets fluctuate, and sometimes they risk capital and lose a bunch, and they might be a billionaire one day and they're not the next day. Around 600 billionaires. If we were to confiscate, if we were to go steal all of their assets,
right,
everything, drain their bank accounts, take their houses and their cars and their jewelry and all their assets, take it all,
right,
we would get somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion.
Right.
That would not fund our government for 1 year. Not even a year. So right, it's
and
not
then what
that
do you do the next year?
Exactly, right? You've already taken everything from all the billion. Maybe you have to kill a few off too, because they might fight back and not want us to take all their stuff. So it's not that the rich aren't paying their fair share. The rich are paying a lot. It's that our government is spending our money and spending on our credit in a way that is unlimited. There's no principled limitation for the spending. And the scary thing about the incoming administration. I mean, this administration, let's not pretend it was anything it wasn't. This administration was quite willing to spend a whole lot of money. This administration added a whole lot to our national debt. It's terrifying to think, what is this next administration going to do?
So you said something really interesting a minute ago, and that was when you start to take this money from people. If you want to take all the money from all the billionaires, you might have to kill a couple of them because a couple of them might fight back.
Yep.
And they might fight back because of our fifth precept, and that is the natural right or the duty to revolution. And that's a really big, serious thing to talk about that we don't take lightly, and we're not sitting here telling everybody, go grab your guns and go shooting like Yosemite Sam out your front door. But this country was founded on the idea that you have a right to your equal individual natural rights, which includes your property, your private property, and you have a right to defend yourself and defend that property when anybody, whether it's a citizen or the government, comes and tries to take it from you.
That's right. And in fact, let me add to that. This country was founded not only on the idea, I mean, the idea is there, but also it was founded on that idea put into action.
Right.
The United States was born out of a revolutionary act because the government under which those colonists who turned into revolutionaries, the government under which they were living didn't agree. They didn't agree that there was a right of revolution. And they said, no, you are going to live under the laws and the regulations we tell you you're going to live under. And there was the fight. That's something that can't be put up to a vote.
Right.
Because neither side cared how the vote would turn out. Neither side. The British said, no, you're going to live under our laws. We don't care how the vote turns out. And the revolutionaries said, no, you try to rule us, we'll kill you. We're not putting that question up to a vote.
And we're starting to get those conversations happening around us right now.
Yeah.
We are starting to get people saying, I don't care that Joe Biden was elected by a majority of the people. Even if it's a given that Joe Biden was elected with a legitimate vote. If I gave that and said it was not rigged, there was nothing wrong.
That's an important point because a lot of our listeners right now are thinking, they're hearing you and they're thinking, well, this wasn't even a legitimate election. But that's not the main point of revolution. Even if you have a legitimate election and then that elected government comes and violates your rights, takes your money, restricts your liberty, that's cause for revolution.
And when we start seeing this political class forming, we have developed, and I think more so over the last 30 years than ever before. And you might correct me. You're a deeper student of history than I am, but I don't think there's ever been a political class as expansive that make millions of dollars exclusively by being a part of the political class than we've seen in the last 2 to 3 decades. Yeah. People like Joe Biden, who have spent their entire career. I mean, he was a state senator in Delaware, I believe, 24, 25 years old, and then 29 years old gets elected to the federal government, and has served in the federal government in some capacity ever since, other than the last 4 years. And the guy has now multiple homes, multiple cars. His entire family is wealthy. They've never done anything productive to show for it.
You're saying that's not because of all of his inventions? Because the iPhone he invented?
Well, at least Al Gore claimed to have invented the internet.
Right.
Joe Biden doesn't even claim to have invented anything.
Right.
We have these questions now starting to come up. And the founders were very, very clear that revolution shouldn't be a constantly occurring thing in terms of you shouldn't do it for, as they said, light and transient causes.
Yeah.
but it should always be a threat.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go down to here some sort of basic concepts that are inherent in this idea of revolution, and then we'll sort of turn our attention to what's going on today and talk about what that kind of means for us. This is one of our challenges living in this modern progressive era, late 2020. Many Americans look at the world in a way that's very different than the founders did. They use different languages, or they use the same terms and they apply different meanings than what words used to have. And an instance of that is there is this view that has grown up. Really, it has expanded since the New Deal. It became very popular in the 60s and 70s. And the view is that democracy, this is a very progressive notion, democracy is an intrinsically good thing, an intrinsically desirable thing. And therefore, there's the world, the ancient world, the classical world. There was the world in which revolution was necessary because it was an undemocratic world. You had all these unelected kings and Caesars and pharaohs and people like that. There's the world where revolution is necessary.
Right.
And then there's the modern democratic world. That's sort of the progressive presentation. We don't need revolution anymore because we have democracy. Democracy solves the problems that revolution used to solve.
Right.
And there's a lot of confusion packed into that modern view. The purpose of the American Revolution, this comes from none other than Thomas Jefferson himself, the author of the Declaration, and there were other writings at the time of the founding echoing this. The purpose of the revolution was not to substitute an unelected tyranny with an elected tyranny.
Right.
It was the purpose of the revolution was not to replace an undemocratic tyranny with a democratic tyranny. Democratic tyrannies, meaning elected governments that then go and violate the rights of citizens, unjustly confiscate their property, unjustly limit their liberty. Democratic tyrannies are no less tyrannical. Democratic tyrannies are just as immoral as undemocratic tyrannies. I have with me here, in my opinion, this is one of the great primers on this whole concept of revolution, really thinking it through both in an abstract theoretical way, but also in a practical, historical, centering it in the United States. What has it meant actually for Americans? This is a book written by my main teacher and mentor, Harry Jaffa, titled A New Birth of Freedom. And the first chapter runs about 75 pages. It's on the election of 1800. And in particular, it's how that right of revolution got transferred from a shooting war against the British into regular constitutional elections. The American attempt to do that. Okay. And as students of history, he invites us to judge. Were they successful? Did that they launched this revolution to secure their rights because they say that the British are violating their rights, and the British were. It's one thing to fight the revolution and throw off the government that's oppressing you. An equally or greater, I was going to say an equally challenging, it might even be a bigger challenge, is the next step. Once you throw off the government that's been violating your rights, what's next?
Right.
What do you replace it with? What do you do so that your rights don't get violated? Now, we know what the Americans did. They created this constitutional framework of government that featured regular elections, but they didn't create a democracy. They didn't say the majority of voting citizens are free to do anything they want to the minority. That was not the framework they created.
Well, and even more importantly, we base our precepts, our fundamental 6 precepts of the Vino Veritas Society, not on the Constitution, but on the message of the Declaration.
Yeah.
Because when the founders were fighting the British, the Constitution was 10 years away. The Constitution was a decade off. We had the Articles of Confederation in between. We had this whole process. And as part of that, they were fighting for the message of within the Declaration.
That's right.
They looked at the Declaration as that document that they said this is going to be our guiding light, our principle.
In that sense, The ideas enshrined in the Declaration, these precepts we're talking about, those are the ends, the goals. The Constitution is a means toward that. And in fact, this is that distinction between means and ends is highlighted by our own history. The Constitution wasn't the first Constitution.
Right.
We had tried an earlier one, the Articles of Confederation. We said this is going to be the means for the end of protecting individual rights, and it didn't work so well. So we got rid of that means and adopted another means. I just wanted to read here a very short passage. I know this is not a cool thing to do in a podcast, so I'll keep it short. This is from Chapter 1 of A New Birth of Freedom, Harry Victor Jaffe. And he's citing Jefferson, and he's citing Jefferson in an approving way. Professor Jaffe agrees, saying Jefferson's right about this. And Jefferson pointed out that the fact that the president and the Congress are elected and are thus men of our choice, they are men of our choice in the sense they got elected, does not lessen the tyrannical character of their usurpations. When they usurp, when they steal power that we haven't given to them and they exercise power over us, that's not right. It doesn't make it less tyrannical. An elected government has no more moral or legal right to arrogate authority or employ powers not delegated by the people through the Constitution than a non-elected government. And here's where it gets interesting, right to our theme of revolution. The use of such power is inconsistent with the constitutional limitations intended to harmonize the rule of the majority with the rights of minority. When a freely elected government usurps authority, it may, by this fact, invite resistance. When an elected government steals power, we never gave them this power to take over our health care or to subsidize education or to create a whole new regulatory agency that's going to regulate the entire global environment, maybe the whole universe that Joe Biden is talking about. All those actions are usurpations. Usurpation is an act of theft, it's stealing. And what they're stealing in the first instance is power. They're exercising power we never gave them, and then usually they have to steal money from us to pay for the programs that they're setting up. And what Jaffe points out rightly, when an elected democratically authorized government does that, they are inviting resistance.
So when Donald Trump vetoes a spending bill because he says you're improperly spending taxpayer dollars, and Nancy Pelosi gets on the microphone, or Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi get in front of a microphone and say, Donald Trump's veto is a threat to our democracy. It's almost as if Donald Trump is starting a resistance.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of goes back to this. I want to flesh this out just a little bit more because it's become so ingrained. I think a lot of people don't see the real distinction here. The progressive view, again, is that democracy solves the problem of tyranny. That's the progressive premise. If we have a democracy, if we have elections, then tyranny is impossible.
Provided that there's also a permanent government that exists on the side that's really making all of the decisions.
Well, that has been the way of the progressives within our experience. Franklin Roosevelt really made this thematic when Roosevelt got elected in 1932. He and his whole program he called the New Deal, and Democratic allies of his who were elected to Congress, collectively they were referred to as the New Dealers in Congress. And those New Dealers in Congress and in the White House were creating all kinds of programs, spending enormous amounts of other people's money, regulating and controlling not just individual businesses, but entire industries in ways that never happened before. This is the first little tiny seeds of what would become the conservative movement when some Americans in the 30s and 40s started pushing back, started rejecting that, saying that that's not right. You guys don't have any rightful authority to control businesses and tell a business owner what price he has to put on his own products and things like that. And Roosevelt hit back hard in a whole series of public addresses. His message was, you critics, You conservatives, they weren't called conservatives yet, but they're the critics who will become conservatives. You critics, you conservatives, you don't need to fear us in the government because we are you. Right. You elected us. We're your friends. We are the American people. We're a democratically elected government. Therefore, tyranny is impossible. In fact, he said in one of his speeches in 1936, because America is democratic, now again, that's wrong, but this is the way he presents it. America is democratic, therefore tyranny was wiped out on July 4th, 1776. It's impossible.
Right.
We cannot have tyranny because instead we have democracy. That's the progressive presentation. As long as our government was somehow authorized by the people, directly or indirectly, somehow democratic, it can only do justice. It cannot do injustice. It cannot be tyrannical. One of the great services that the Vino Veritas Society is going to provide to the modern world is to disabuse fellow citizens of that mistaken view. That's wrong.
Let's simplify that a little bit. There's something you said that I want to make sure everybody really, really heard and understand. FDR says we can't be tyrannical because we are you. Mm-hmm. When somebody gets elected to government, there is a reason they are no longer you and I. And that is they now have access to legal use of force.
That's right. That is
I want everybody to really let that sink in.
That's right.
The minute they become an agent of the government, they have access to the legal use of force that you and I no longer have.
And let's make that clear what that means. If I want some of your money as two fellow citizens,
right.
I have a couple of, I have some options as to how I could try to get your money. One way I could get your money is to make something really cool that I think you like. I could offer it to you for say, hey, Dave, I made this thing that I think you like. You want to trade some of your money, right, for the thing I made. That would be one way I could get some of your money. If I was nefarious and an unjust person, I could try to steal it. I could try to break into your house or hack into your checking account and steal your money. But I legally, within the parameter of the law, I cannot make you give me your money.
Right.
I can't until I get elected to government. Once I'm elected to government, we can now pass a taxing bill, and we can, with full legal authority, come and take your money from you. And so you're absolutely right. That is a big dividing line between a power that people in government have versus a power that people not in government don't have.
When we talk about that, that goes back to our second precept, that all men are created equal. Mm-hmm. What we are doing is, with the Constitution, by limiting the powers of the government, we are saying we are still equal. We are giving you certain legal rights to use force, but within this reason.
That's right.
And if you violate that, we have a right to revolt. We have a right to get to revolution and to say we're taking that power back from you because you have abused it.
Within our history, there is a great symbol of the revolutionary spirit, and it's that old Gadsden flag. Mm-hmm. That coiled up snake, and said, and there's a rattlesnake, a venomous snake. I mean, rattlesnakes can kill you, and they can cause a whole lot of damage. Nobody wants to get bitten by a rattlesnake. You're off to a really bad day if you get bitten by a rattlesnake. And that line underneath the snake, right, said, don't tread on me. I am like a coiled up, venomous, dangerous snake. Will I kill you? Will I cause you to lose an arm or leg? You don't know for sure. The best thing to do with a rattlesnake is to stay away from it. Don't go step on it. Don't go step near it.
Right.
And if you do, the snake's going to bite you. The Americans flew that flag, representing this was their spirit, not only during the Revolution, but for many years, decades actually, following the Revolution. To tell those, even though the Americans adopted their own constitution, they authorized it, right? We the people do ordain and establish this Constitution. So in that sense, the Constitution is authorized democratically by the people, and they start holding elections. They're electing the men of their choice. That's a phrase from Jefferson, the people of their choice. And still those Americans wanted to send this message, look, you clowns, you jokers we just elected, we didn't give you any power to violate our rights. We elected you to go exercise these very few constitutional powers that we delegated to you for one purpose only, to make sure we're secure in our property and our liberty. And this is a tremendous service that the Vino Veritas Society is doing in helping our fellow Americans understand that the idea of democracy, or even the practice of democracy, the practice of having elections does not negate the right of revolution.
Right.
Because an elected government can be just as despotic, just as unjust, just as tyrannical as an unelected government. And therefore, the right of revolution is a natural right. It's an eternal right. It's an unalienable right. It never goes away. It's always there. It's a tool that we should reach for it in only really serious, almost desperate situations, because revolution opens up a whole can of potential problems. But it never goes away, and it is never displaced by democracy. Many of our friends and allies, some of our own members, when they hear fellow progressive citizens refer to our country as a democracy, a lot of our friends quickly correct them. Well, this isn't a democracy, that's a republic. They're right about that. I would encourage our members, add a little more, go a little deeper into that distinction you're making. Make it clear that even if we were a democracy, an election does not make a wrong into a right.
Correct.
It doesn't. If I want to violate your rights as an individual citizen, that's wrong. If I steal your money from you or hurt you in some way, if I get elected, if thousands of other people elect me to government and then I use the power of government to hurt you, to take your money, it's the same injustice. It's not made right just because I got elected.
And we can see examples of that throughout the South for a number of years in the 1800s and even beyond that of we're going to vote on people and laws that violate other black citizens' rights.
In the form of slavery, right?
And in the form of slavery, in the form of quote-unquote separate but equal, all of those things, all the way up through the civil rights movement. I mean, there were laws that were being passed that were a violation of American citizens' rights, and those were wrong.
That's right.
Regardless of whether or not they were elected democratically or they were voted on democratically, they were still wrong, and they were still tyrannical.
So this natural right of revolution, contrary to what many progressives today think, this right of revolution, it still exists. It's still important. It has not been eclipsed by the rise of democracy in America, to use Tocqueville's famous title of his book. And you're right, growing numbers of people are talking about it right now. And many of them they're quite serious. They're not in a laughing, joking manner, because what has happened is our elected government has now created this gigantic apparatus attached to government, which is, first of all, it's not elected. Even those who say we're a democracy, well, even the most ardent progressive has to acknowledge the regulators at the EPA or the IRS are not elected.
Right.
All the administrators and bureaucrats at the Department of Education who fling money around, they're not elected. So there's this gigantic part of our government that's not elected at all. And yet those agencies have real power over us. They have legal power. When the EPA issues a regulation, or OSHA issues regulations on business, or the IRS issues a regulation on filing your tax form, violate one of those regulations and see what happens. Right?
Don't pay your taxes and see what happens.
The full power of the government's coming after you.
Thinking that through is overwhelming for a lot of people, and it should be. It should be a little frightening to think that there are people out there who have that kind of control over your life. So
I want to come back to this book because a major theme that Professor Jaffa makes clear in that first chapter, and it runs throughout. It runs throughout the whole book, and it really is it's one of those great books. It's an intellectual tour de force. I highly recommend it. The point that he makes is the right of revolution is the ultimate protector of all the other rights It is the ultimate one, because what do you do when you right to free speech or religious liberty or your right to keep your property that you earn, when those things are being violated by your own government? What is the recourse? The ultimate check on government is not a veto power, right? It's not judicial review. The ultimate check is the natural right of revolution that all human beings have always. Now,
that we're going to take that power away from you.
That's right.
We gave you a power.
That's right.
We the people, we granted you a certain amount of power.
Right.
We can take it away. We will take it away.
Right. Unlike many of our fellow citizens today, progressive types, who think that our rights are gifts from government and therefore government can take them back. That's wrong. That is an incorrect view. It's just the opposite. We gave government the powers, and by golly, we'll decide when and if we want to take them back and how much. And the argument Professor Jaffa makes is sometimes that right of revolution, it's necessary to act on it, to actually engage in real revolution, which in some dire circumstances might mean physical violence.
So let's transition to that.
Let me put the one gloss on here, and then we'll move forward. He makes the point that threat of revolution should always be present, even when you don't need it, even when government seems to be doing what it seems to be doing its proper purpose, and you're holding elections the way you should, and the people who get elected stay within the limits of the Constitution and are respecting and protecting individual rights. His argument, and he's right about this, the people should still be threatening. They should be showing that revolutionary spirit, because it's a good incentive for those in government to always be reminded, man, this is a feisty, spirited, revolutionary people. Let's not piss them off. Let's not violate their rights, because we don't want to trigger that.
Let's not write 5,000-page spending bills.
Yes.
And when we do, let's be shaking when we're signing it.
And that's actually a great summary of this first chapter of the book. The political class should be a little scared of the people. They should. And if there's a politician who's about to sign a bill, and there's a question in his mind whether it's right or whether it's going to violate some rights, he should be shaking a little bit. Right. He should be trembling. He should be a little scared, because he should be thinking, man, this might anger a whole lot of Americans. You don't want Americans angered. That's the right kind of spirit that helps keep constitutional government constitutional. And what the great challenge today is, and I think most of our listeners would probably agree with this, politicians are no longer scared of Americans. No. They're not. No. AOC will sit there in Congress and conjure up whatever new programs and Green New Deals, and at no point is she trembling with fear because she thinks I might tread on people who don't want to be tread on.
And nobody in government at any level. There's nobody in the state legislature who's sitting there. I mean, I've seen the arguments and the discussions on Facebook where they say, you can come and protest me at the Capitol. When I'm in session and I'm at the Capitol, feel free, come protest us.
Right.
But when I'm at my home, that's disrespectful. Don't show up at my home on my street and block my driveway and protest.
And just to give some context, the political class says that's disrespectful. Well, you know what else is disrespectful? Taking my money from me. That's disrespectful. Right. Shutting down my business so that I can't make my house payment or feed my kid. That's pretty damn disrespectful too.
And we haven't even talked about what if we show up at the home of the head of the EPA or the IRS.
Right.
There's a whole conversation there. And I think we should find a way, whether it's a toolbox or whether it's an event or whether it's something where we actually help our members go through this book and actually really dig into it. And we make it available for reading and everything else. But with our last 10 minutes or so, I think there's an important conversation to be had. And it's a really a foundational conversation to why the Vino Veritas Society exists. And the question that I think we all have to ask ourselves, well, there's two questions we all have to ask ourselves, is one, what qualifies as, where is that line? Where is it no longer light and transient causes? At what point do we feel like we have a government who is wholly oppressive or despotic? And that's a question that we all kind of have to answer for ourselves. It is somewhat subjective.
Let's offer here the actual language of the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration says, this is right in the middle of that famous second paragraph that begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." This is the Declaration. "Prudence will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes." If you have a government that's been around for a long time and overall it does a pretty good job of protecting rights, and you understand Milton Friedman's quadrants, you understand there's always going to be some waste, some inefficiency, some minor injustices, work within that government to try to improve it. You don't just throw off. You don't engage in revolution for light and transient causes.
And to that point, and this is a point you've made to me several times, and I want to echo it to our listeners. It is extremely difficult to throw off a government but keep the government structure.
Yeah.
And it's never been done ever in human history. So when you think about revolution, it's not so easy to just say, well, we just want to get rid of the government, but we still believe in the Declaration of Independence and we still believe in the Constitution. You're probably going to throw off the Constitution the minute you throw off the government. Right. The minute that revolution starts, that the Constitution's probably out the window.
Well, in fact, let me read this second sentence, and then I'm going to offer an insight from Abraham Lincoln on that. So, no revolution for light and transient causes, but the Declaration continues. When a long train of abuses and usurpations, there's that word again, right? Stealing power, pursuing the same object, evinces it, right? It illustrates, it shows, it reveals a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. Then the Declaration says it is their right, it is their duty, not just a right, an obligation, a duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. The question is for us, this is your point that each of us has to think this through. Our government is engaging in all kinds of injustices. Our government is violating our rights. It's restricting our liberty, controlling our businesses, taking money from us and spending on things we want nothing to do with. Are those injustices that we see our government doing, are they still light and transient? Or have they crossed the line? Is there now a clear design by those in government to reduce us under absolute despotism?
Right.
That's kind of a judgment, right, for each person needs to think that through. You pointed out this is a real challenge for modern freedom-loving Americans. Many freedom-loving Americans adore and cherish the principles of the Revolution, these precepts that we're talking about.
Principles of the Declaration.
Principles of the Declaration of Independence. They love the constitutional framework of government. They think the Constitution was wisely designed, maybe not perfect, but pretty good. And yet they're repulsed by this gigantic, unconstitutional administrative state. Sometimes I call it the regulatory subsidy state. How do you launch a revolution against part of that you don't like, but preserve the other part? Lincoln gave one of his earliest speeches for which he's known, his Lyceum address. He was a young man, it's the 1830s. He made an argument there that he said, big premise, if you have a good foundation for a good government, and that government produces some really bad laws, blatantly bad, unjust, unconstitutional, Lincoln said it is best to obey, tolerate those bad laws, and work within the framework there to try to reform those bad laws. Whether you repeal them or you can amend them so that they're not so bad. Because once you start to discourage disobedience of some laws, it very quickly leads many citizens to think we can disobey all laws.
Right.
And very quickly you approach a situation of lawlessness, which is mob rule. And this is why revolution, it's an eternal, natural right. We always have it. And it's always dangerous. It's always problematic because once you unleash those revolutionary forces and you know, a real revolution is not just one or two or three disgruntled citizens. We're talking large numbers of citizens reject the authority of their own government. and are actively fighting back against it, where does it go from there? Even if they're successful, the famous example that comes to mind is the French Revolution.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
They couldn't stop the revolution. They threw off the existing government. They actually cut the head off of the king. But everyone who attempted to create some kind of system of law, the revolutionaries in France said, "Oh, now you want to try to rule over us? We're going to cut your head off." And it just kept spiraling out of control, and eventually results in a military strongman, Napoleon. You end up with Napoleonic rule.
And what's interesting is, and we're coming up on time, but I want to make sure we get a couple of things. What's interesting is, in America, we had George Washington. And George Washington, maybe better than anybody else in history, was able to stop that revolutionary cycle, right? Revolution, it's a cycle. He came in and he became president, and there were all kinds of people all over the country saying, now you're our king, and now you're acting like a despot, and you need to be overthrown. And he was able to manage that properly to allow us to move into what grew into this apparently progressive democratic state, but in the immediate context there, to have a founding, to stop the revolution and to found some laws, and to actually create a constitution, and to realize the Articles of Confederation weren't doing the job, and let's create the Constitution. So it's important to have that, and I think as part of that conversation that it's important to have a George Washington. It's important to have somebody who's sort of manipulating the currents, so to speak. You also have to have this trust among each other. Well, let me add this about Washington, because we can ask, where's our Washington today? Who is that Washington? And that's a hard question to answer. And the other thing about Washington, that he is the indispensable man in the revolution. You have to have Washington for the American Revolution to succeed for so many reasons. But I think the central one is a moral reason. People trusted him. There was a trust. If you're going to try to get a big band of revolutionary brothers together and say, let's throw off this government, that's a terrifying, scary thing. You got to be able to trust each other. And I don't know that within the circles of political criticism and discontent and pushback against government injustice, I don't know that there's that realm of trust among citizens. And it's one of the main purposes that we form, the Vino Veritas Society. And I think let's end talking about that just for a minute. Coming up in January, so we're finishing out 2020. Starting January 2021, we're going to start talking at all of our chapter meetings about the evolution of those who are our pledges, our poor Richards, into guardians. How about the promotion? The promotion? Yeah, rather than evolution. All of a sudden I was thinking of Charles Darwin. Evolution was the wrong word. We've actually been saying elevation. Okay, and that was the word I meant to use. Yes. So the elevation from poor Richard to guardian. Yeah. And a lot of people are starting to ask questions. Well, what are the perks and what are the benefits and what comes with that? There are, but it's not about that. It's about becoming a guardian to me and to us and for the reason we started this entire organization was to develop trust among each other. And to me, the way you develop trust is doing two things together. You learn with people, you speak with people, you discuss, you have engaging, meaningful conversations where you are honest with each other and you tell each other where you stand on certain things. Right. And then you break bread and drink wine. And those are the ways, and you develop that bond, that friendship, that relationship. And, so the path to trust is Vino and Veritas. There you go. So for anybody who was wondering how we came up with the name, there it is. And it really is important. I want to know that every single person who we give one of these guardian pins to, and everyone who puts it on, I know that I can trust them to stand up and say, this is wrong, and I'm going to have an honest conversation about it, and I'm going to try to go out into the world and tell others that this is wrong. And they're also not going to promote despotism. They're not going to succumb to despotism. And part of that, are our virtues. And we're going to get into, today we talked about the last two virtues. We didn't mention the last two precepts. We didn't mention the last precept, which is mutual civic trust.
Right.
But we talked quite a bit about it. So next week, and which will be next month, we're going to start getting into the four virtues.
Right.
And part of that trust is being a virtuous citizen. Being a guardian is saying to your neighbors, to your friends, to those you are spending time with, I intend to be a virtuous citizen. And part of that is being self-reliant and self-restrained. And I think those are two of the key things that make a revolution viable and worthwhile. If you don't have people who are self-reliant and self-restrained and know where to start and where to stop, or when it's worth starting and when it's not worth, and how to make those good decisions, none of this is worth it, and none of it's going to end up well. It's going to end up like the French. You
need citizens who have that civic virtue, and you need trust, and they need to be familiar with each other. It's good to remind people here the difference between a real revolutionary spirit that is capable of an actual revolution in the cause of justice, in the cause of freedom, versus a riot. I mean, we just went through a year here where we saw all kinds of riots, right? And people marching down streets and breaking windows and burning down private, homes and things like that. And a riot does not solve the problem of government injustice, of a government who has evinced a design to reduce us under absolute despotism. We don't want random, purposeless riots that don't actually achieve any goals. We want Americans to remember their actual revolutionary spirit and to get to know each other and know that there are others out there with that same kind of spirit. And the truth is, it would be good, it would be really, really good for the fate of freedom in America if we had some members within the political cause who started talking openly about, we are a revolutionary nation. The Americans are a revolutionary people. We in government, we should respect that, and we should be a little cautious about treading on our fellow citizens just because we got elected to office.
Absolutely. And that makes us guardians, right? I mean, it's guarding that idea and being willing to take that step, but knowing when to take it, how to take it. And I think everybody, we go back to that first question. Have we reached that point where, and everybody makes that decision independently, but you also have to ask yourself, do I have enough people I trust on my side? And if you don't think about revolution yet. Start thinking about developing more people you trust.
Hugely important point. Even for those who say these injustices are no longer light and transient, they are now part of a long purpose to reduce us under despotism. Okay, that might be right. What's next? What are you going to do about that? And if you're sitting alone and have no friends and don't know anyone else, you're probably not going to be able to do much about that.
And I hate throwing this in so late, but it makes me think of the militia in Michigan that all just got arrested a month or two ago. They didn't think through that entire thing.
Right.
And they believed that the government had violated at all levels, and they were going after Democrats and Republicans alike.
Right.
This wasn't a Republican group or anything else. This was a group of people who believed that the government has become despotic and should be overthrown. But they didn't do the rest of it. They didn't build their coalitions. They didn't think through the what does this actually mean, and it just led to a disaster for them, and it wasn't good for anybody. What happened to them and what they tried to do, it's not good for anybody, and it's not a good look for America.
Right.
With that, we are the guardians. We will continue to be the guardians, and I'm really excited that next month we will be adding more guardians to our organization.
That's why our motto is No Sumos Custodes.
No Sumos Custodes. Until next week and next year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.